1969 Lincoln Continental Mark III, approximately 91,000 miles. Engine burns a lot of oil, so time to pull it and rebuild it, put it back in. Pretty good original shape. Unfortunately, oil burning problem. According to the shop manual, remove the engine in just 22 easy steps. So I'm going to walk through it and we'll see how it goes. Step 1, raise the hood. Well, already did that. Step 2, remove the hood. Okay, hood's off. Step number 3, drain cooling system at radiator and cylinder block. Drain the crankcase. Okay, radiator and block drained. Crankcase drained. Step 4. Disconnect ground cable from battery, remove air cleaner and intake duct assembly, and cover the carburetor air horn with a clean cloth. Battery disconnected, air cleaner removed, and a clean lint-free cloth placed over the carburetor. Step 5. Disconnect radiator upper and lower hoses at engine. Disconnect transmission oil cooler lines at the radiator. Hoses disconnected, transmission cooler disconnected. Step 6. Remove the cooling fan to water pump hub retaining bolts. Remove radiator shroud retaining screws. Remove the cooling fan assembly and shroud. This is going to cut my hands. Shroud and fan removed. Step 7. Remove radiator upper support and radiator. Okay, radiator out. Step 8. If equipped with air conditioning, which it is, isolate the compressor and disconnect service valves and hoses at the compressor. Remove the clamp bolt at the compressor muffler. Support and position the refrigerant lines out of the way. Loosen compressor drive belt, idler pulley, and remove the drive belt. Remove the compressor support bracket to water pump bolt. Remove the compressor to mounting bracket bolts. Remove power steering reservoir and position it to one side. Disconnect the compressor clutch wire and remove the compressor. Remove the compressor mounting bracket and idler pulley. That was a very long step 8. Nice feature of these old York-style compressors is you can isolate the compressor without discharging the refrigerant from the system. Also nice with this engine is you can actually remove the engine without discharging the entire air conditioning system. Nice since R12 has become a little expensive. Okay, step 9. Set a drain pan under the power steering pump. Disconnect the oil return line at the pump and drain the pump. Disconnect the return line at the power steering reservoir and remove the reservoir. Okay, reservoir is out. Step 10. Disconnect the fuel inlet line at the fuel pump. Plug or cap the line to prevent fuel loss. There's a fuel pump. Pretty simple. Alright, that was simple. Step 11. Loosen the alternator adjusting arm and mounting bolts. Remove the drive belts and water pump pulley. Remove the alternator and mounting brackets and position out of the way, leaving the wires connected. Okay, out of the way. Step 12. Disconnect the ground cable at the right front corner of the cylinder block. Disconnect the heater hoses. Remove the transmission oil filler tube, retaining bolt, and the right valve rocker arm cover. Remove the bolt from the right valve rocker arm cover and position the transmission oil filler tube out of the way. There's a lot of things in this step. Alright, these are heater hoses disconnected. Step 13. Disconnect all vacuum lines at rear of intake manifold. Disconnect wiper motor pressure line and return line, and remove bracket from cylinder head. Position wiper hydraulic lines out of the way. Mark IIIs, of course, have hydraulic windshield wipers driven off the power steering pump. I think I'll also take this opportunity to have a few of those rubber sections replaced by a hydraulic hose rebuilder. Okay, that step was a little confusing. I don't think you need to remove the line that goes from the power steering box to the windshield wiper motor, so I didn't remove it. Alright, step 14. Disconnect speed control cable at carburetor and bracket if so equipped. Car is not equipped with speed control. Disconnect accelerator rod and transmission rod at bell crank and secure out of way. I guess that's way down there. Okay, that wasn't too bad. Remove the kickdown rod and then move the accelerator control assembly out of the way. Step number 15. Disconnect engine wiring harness at multi-connector on dash. That would just be that red connector right there. Alright, disconnected. Not sure why that one little item had to be its own step when some of these steps are so involved, but... Step 16. Raise vehicle on hoist. Yeah, I wish. Disconnect resonator inlet pipes at exhaust manifolds. Disconnect idler arm brackets from underbody. Pull idler arm assembly down. No lift, so this is going to be done with jacks and jack stands. Alright, exhaust manifolds were pretty easy to detach from the exhaust pipes, surprisingly. I think the exhaust manifold gaskets were replaced at some point in the past, so it wasn't all seized up. Idler arm is disconnected. Now, step 17. Disconnect the starter cable from starter solenoid. Remove starter retaining bolts and remove starter by moving starter assembly forward, rotating it to turn the assembly, the solenoid outward, then removing it towards the rear of the vehicle. Okay, starter's out. Step 18. Remove cylinder block to converter housing supports. Remove access cover from converter housing. Remove flywheel to converter retaining bolts. Revolving flywheel as necessary. Remove lower converter to engine rear cover plate retaining bolts. Okay, it said to remove the converter housing to block supports, but you can't actually get the supports off of the block because the bolts are blocked by the engine mounts. So I disconnected them from the converter housing, and that should be enough. I don't see any clearance issues. So Step 19. Remove nuts retaining front support insulators to underbody crossmember. That would be the engine mounts. Alright, disconnected the motor mounts. I think the instructions are wrong, or at least confusing. They say to remove nuts retaining front support insulators to underbody crossmember. But really there's two parts to the motor mount that are just connected by a bolt. It's almost impossible to remove the actual lower, I'll call it the lower support, from the crossmember, because the bolts are way up inside the crossmember. You can't really reach them. You'd have to remove the lower control arms for the front suspension to be able to get up in there to really get a wrench on the other side of the bolt to keep it from spinning. So I saw other people who pulled engines out of Mark IIIs. They just undid the part that connects the two components of the engine mount. So pulled that. So I'm going to consider 19 done. On to 20. Position transmission jack to support transmission. Well, actually I already did that. It's not a transmission jack, but it's a regular jack. It should be okay. Step 21. Lower the vehicle on hoist. Yeah. Remove upper converter housing to cylinder block retaining bolts, left side. Disconnect coil wire and remove coil and bracket assembly from intake manifold. Okay, not sure why I need to remove the coil before doing this, but alright. And we finally reached step 22. Attach engine lifting sling, tool number T53L-300-A, and hoist to lifting brackets at exhaust manifolds. Carefully remove engine from vehicle, install engine on work stand, and remove lifting sling. Alright. Okay, well, here's a little bit of a post-mortem now that the engine is out. Overall, I mean, I followed every step, all 22 of them. Took quite a while, since I was doing it little bits at a time over several weekends. Main issue with pulling it, so the 460s have these lifting points on the engines. They're on the third exhaust runner on the exhaust manifolds. Those are what were used, I assume, at the factory to lower the engine and transmission onto the chassis. But probably because it was the engine and transmission. They're located at a point that's pretty far back on the engine. The shop manual says to use those as the lifting points to pull just the engine, not the transmission, out of the vehicle. But the engine is very front heavy in that case. So what happened is when I was lifting from those points, once the transmission finally let go, when I finally got it away, the front of the engine went down and the back of the engine popped up. It could have been a lot worse than it was. Front of the water pump could have gone through the air conditioning condenser, which would have been bad. That didn't happen, thank God. What did happen though is at the back, when the back of the engine popped up, it smashed into the heater core inlet and bent it. So I'm now going to have to replace the heater core. Granted, this is probably easier to do with the engine out, and thank goodness it didn't actually damage the heater box. That would have been expensive. But I hadn't planned on replacing the heater core, so I will have to be replacing the heater core. Other than that, engine's out. Now I can begin engine disassembly, send off the heads and the block off to the machine shop, hopefully find out what exactly is wrong with this engine. It's been burning a lot of oil. It has pretty low oil pressure when it's hot as well.